Scarlett had always dreamed of speaking English fluently, but no matter how hard she tried, she always hesitated. One day she discovered a new way. First, listen, then speak, and everything changed. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the Fluent Storybook for more amazing stories that help you learn English effortlessly. Today we are going to share story of Scarlett. Scarlett had always been fascinated by the English language. Ever since she was young, she had dreamed of speaking fluently, just like the characters in her favorite movies and TV shows. She would sit in front of the screen, listening to the way they spoke, so naturally, so effortlessly. She had spent years in school studying English, learning vocabulary words, practicing grammar rules, and writing essays. On paper, she knew the language well. She could read long passages, answer comprehension questions, and even write short stories in English. But the moment she had to speak, everything changed. Whenever she opened her mouth to say something in English, her mind went completely blank. The words she had memorized disappeared as if they had never existed. She would stutter, hesitate, and feel her face grow warm with embarrassment. Scarlett hated this feeling. She knew she had the knowledge, but somehow she couldn't use it in real life. Speaking English felt like standing on a high diving board, looking down at the water, knowing she had to jump but feeling too afraid to take the leap. Her teachers always told her to practice speaking more. Just try, they would say. You know the words, you just have to use them. But it wasn't that simple. In class, when the teacher asked a question, Scarlett felt panic rise inside her. She knew the answer. She had read about it in her textbook. But the moment she tried to form a sentence, doubt crept in. What if she made a mistake? What if people laughed at her accent? What if she used the wrong word? She would watch as her classmates raised their hands, speaking with confidence, even if their English wasn't perfect. Meanwhile, she stayed quiet, afraid to get it wrong. At home, Scarlett tried to practice by talking to herself in the mirror. She would read sentences aloud, trying to make her voice sound natural. But no matter how much she practiced, real conversations still felt impossible. Speaking to herself was one thing, but speaking in front of others was completely different. It was as if there was an invisible wall between her thoughts and her voice, stopping her from saying what she wanted to say. One day, in her English class, Scarlett noticed another student, Mia, answering questions easily. Mia wasn't the best student in grammar or writing, but when it came to speaking, she had no fear. She spoke with confidence, even if she made mistakes. Scarlett watched her in admiration. How did she do it? How did she speak so easily without freezing up? After class, she finally gathered the courage to ask, "Mia, how do you speak so well?" Scarlett asked, hoping for some secret trick that could change everything for her. Mia smiled and shrugged. "I just listen a lot," she said. "I listen first. Then I speak." Scarlett frowned. Listen. She had always focused on memorizing words, learning grammar, and practicing on her own. She never thought about listening as a way to improve speaking. "What do you mean?" she asked. Mia leaned against her desk, thinking for a moment. "You know how babies learn a language," she said. "They don't start by speaking. They listen to their parents all the time. They hear words, sentences, conversations, over and over. Then, after listening enough, they start to speak. But when they speak, they already know how words sound, how sentences are formed. It's easier for them." Scarlett had never thought about it that way. She had spent so much time trying to force herself to speak that she had never focused on listening. Could that really be the key? As Scarlett walked home that day, Mia's words echoed in her mind. "I listen first. Then I speak. Maybe that was what she had been missing all along. She had been treating English like a subject to study instead of a language to absorb. She had been focusing on the rules instead of the sounds, the structure instead of the flow. Maybe the secret wasn't just about speaking more, but about listening first. That night, Scarlett sat in her room, thinking about what Mia had said. She wondered how she could start this new way of learning. If listening was the key, then where should she begin? She had never really paid attention to how English sounded in real conversations. She had read books, memorized definitions, and practiced grammar, but she had never just listened. Maybe it was time to change that. As she picked up her phone and searched for English podcasts, TV shows, and audiobooks, she felt something new, hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the answer she had been looking for all along. That night, Scarlett sat on her bed, staring at the screen of her phone. Mia's words kept repeating in her mind. I listen first. Then I speak. It was such a simple idea, yet Scarlett had never thought about it before. She had spent years trying to memorize grammar rules, forcing herself to speak, and feeling frustrated when the words wouldn't come out. But what if she had been doing it all wrong? What if the real key to speaking English wasn't about speaking more, but about listening first? Scarlett took a deep breath and started searching for ways to improve her listening skills. She found a podcast designed for English learners and played the first episode. As the voices filled the room, she tried her best to focus. At first, it was overwhelming. The speakers talked too fast, and she couldn't catch every word. She felt frustrated. Was this really going to help? But then she remembered what Mia had said about babies. She closed her eyes and thought about how babies learn a language. They don't start by memorizing vocabulary lists. They don't study grammar. They don't force themselves to speak before they're ready. Instead, they listen. Every day, they hear their parents talking, repeating the same words and phrases over and over. They hear the sounds of the language, the rhythm, the way sentences flow. And then, one day they start speaking, not because they memorized words, but because they absorbed the language naturally. Scarlett opened her eyes and hit the play button again. This time, she didn't try to understand every single word. Instead, she let the sounds wash over her, just like a baby listening to a new language for the first time. She listened to the way the words connected, the way the sentences flowed. And something amazing happened. She started recognizing words she had learned before. They weren't just words on a page anymore. They were real, spoken by real people, in real conversations. For the first time, English didn't feel like something she had to study. It felt alive. The next morning, Scarlett decided to continue her experiment. Instead of listening to music in her own language on the way to school, she put in her headphones and played another English podcast. She didn't try to understand everything. She just listened. She noticed how certain words were pronounced differently than she expected. She paid attention to the rise and fall of sentences, the way speakers emphasized certain words. And the more she listened, the more familiar it all became. At school, Scarlett couldn't wait to tell Mia about what she had discovered. Mia, you were right, she said excitedly. I tried listening first, and it's like, I don't know, but English is starting to sound more natural. Mia grinned. I told you. That's how I learned. I used to struggle too, but then I just started listening to English every single day, on the bus, before bed, even while eating. At first, I didn't understand much, but after a while, I started recognizing words, phrases, even whole sentences. And then speaking became easier. Scarlett nodded, feeling a spark of excitement. It's like how babies learn, she said. They listen for months before they say their first words. And when they do start talking, they already know how the language sounds. Mia clapped her hands together. Exactly. Think about it. No one expects a baby to start speaking perfectly. But for some reason, when we learn a second language, we expect ourselves to speak right away. It doesn't work like that. You have to listen first, get used to how the language sounds, and then speaking comes naturally. Scarlett had never thought about it this way before, but it made perfect sense. She had been trying to run before she had even learned to walk. Maybe she needed to take a step back and focus on listening first. That night, Scarlett decided to fully commit to this new way of learning. She created a listening routine for herself. Before school, she would listen to an English podcast. After school, she would watch an episode of an English TV show with subtitles. Before bed, she would listen to an audiobook. She wouldn't force herself to speak until she felt ready. She would just listen, absorb, and let the language settle into her mind naturally. At first, it was difficult. There were still many words she didn't understand. But instead of feeling frustrated, she reminded herself that babies don't understand everything right away either. They just keep listening, day after day, until one day, the words start making sense. And then, something incredible happened. After a few weeks of consistent listening, Scarlett started to notice changes. She didn't have to translate every word in her head anymore. Some words just made sense. When she heard common phrases, she understood them instantly, without even thinking. It was as if her brain had started recognizing patterns, just like a baby learning its first words. One afternoon, Scarlett was walking home when she passed a group of tourists speaking English. Normally, she wouldn't have paid much attention. But this time, she stopped in her tracks. She could understand what they were saying. Not every single word, but enough to follow the conversation. It was a small moment, but to Scarlett, it felt like magic. She rushed home, excited to tell Mia. Mia, I understood a real English conversation today, without translating in my head. Mia laughed. See, your brain is getting used to the language. That's what happens when you listen first. Scarlett felt a new kind of confidence growing inside her. If listening had helped her understand English better, then maybe, just maybe, it would also help her speak. But she wasn't going to rush it. She was going to keep listening, keep absorbing, and wait for the right moment to try speaking. And that moment was coming soon. Scarlett's excitement about understanding real conversations didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. For the first time in her life, English didn't feel like a subject she had to study. It felt like something she was becoming a part of. Every day, she was noticing small improvements. Words she had once struggled with started to feel familiar. Sentences made sense without needing to be translated. And most importantly, she no longer felt afraid of English. But Scarlett knew that excitement alone wasn't enough. If she wanted real results, she had to turn listening into a habit. She sat on her bed one evening, her notebook open in front of her. She wrote down a question at the top of the page. How can I listen to English every single day? She tapped her pen against the paper, thinking. She didn't want to just listen randomly. She needed a system, something that would fit into her daily life. Something that would make listening as natural as breathing. And so, she started making a plan. Step 1. Replacing her old habits with English. The first thing Scarlett realized was that she already spent a lot of time listening. To music, to videos, to random background noise. What if she simply replaced some of those moments with English? Instead of listening to her favorite songs in her native language on the way to school, she switched to English songs. At first, it was strange. She didn't understand every lyric, and sometimes, the words blended together. But she didn't let that stop her. She focused on how the singers pronounced words, how the rhythm of English flowed. She found songs with clear lyrics and played them over and over. After a while, she started recognizing words she had heard before. She also replaced social media videos in her own language with English ones. Whenever she had free time, instead of watching short videos that didn't help her, she searched for simple English conversations, interviews, or daily life vlogs. These weren't lessons. They were real people speaking real English. And that was exactly what she needed. At first, her brain resisted. It was easier to stick to what was familiar. But Scarlett reminded herself of something important. Habits take time to build. If she wanted English to feel natural, she had to make it a part of her life every single day. Step 2. Creating a morning listening routine. Mornings were always a rush for Scarlett. She barely had time to get ready before running out the door. But she realized that mornings were also a perfect opportunity to listen to English. So she made a rule: every morning, from the moment she woke up until she left for school, she would listen to something in English. At first, she wasn't sure what to listen to. Then, she discovered daily news podcasts in English. They were short, about 5 to 10 minutes long, and talked about simple topics. Some even had transcripts, so she could read along if she wanted to. She made it a habit to press play as soon as she got out of bed. Even if she was brushing her teeth, making breakfast, or packing her bag, she kept listening. She didn't stop to translate every word. She just let the sounds of English fill the room. And something interesting happened. Over time, her brain started recognizing the patterns of spoken English. She noticed how native speakers used common phrases, how their tone changed when they asked questions, and how certain words were pronounced differently than she expected. It was as if her brain was slowly getting used to the language without her even trying. Step 3. Turning free time into learning time. Scarlett used to scroll through social media during breaks at school. But now she had a new rule. Every time she had a break, she would listen to something in English, even if it was just for 5 minutes. She started bringing her headphones everywhere. In the cafeteria, while waiting for class to start, even on the bus ride home, she always had something playing in her ears. She wasn't forcing herself to study. She was just surrounding herself with English, just like Mia had told her. And the more she listened, the easier it became. She found that she could recognize full sentences without even thinking. Sometimes, she even caught herself thinking in English without meaning to. It was a small but powerful sign that her brain was adapting. One day, during lunch, Mia noticed Scarlett smiling while listening to her headphones. "What are you listening to?" Mia asked. "Just a podcast," Scarlett said. "It's crazy. I actually understand what they're talking about." Mia grinned. "That's because you're training your ears. The more you listen, the easier it gets." Scarlett nodded. She had started to see English not as a problem, but as a puzzle. And every day, she was finding more pieces. Step 4. Using TV shows and audiobooks for fun learning. After dinner, Scarlett used to watch TV in her own language. But now, she decided to switch to English TV shows with subtitles. She started with a simple sitcom that had short conversations, everyday language, and clear pronunciation. At first, she read the subtitles carefully, matching the words with the sounds. But after a while, she noticed something amazing. She didn't need to read every word. She could understand just by listening. Then, she took it a step further. Instead of watching, she tried listening to audiobooks in English. It was harder than watching TV because there were no subtitles. But she treated it like a challenge. She started with children's books, stories that had simple language but still kept her interested. The more she listened, the more comfortable she became. She noticed how intonation and pauses gave meaning to sentences. She heard new vocabulary in context instead of on a boring word list. And most importantly, she was enjoying English. For the first time in her life, learning English didn't feel like studying. It felt like living. Step 5. Ending the day with English. Before bed, Scarlett had one last rule. No matter how tired she was, she had to end her day with English. Sometimes, she re-listened to a podcast from the morning. Other times, she watched a short video or reviewed a conversation she had heard during the day. But her favorite thing to do was talk to herself in English. She would lie in bed, close her eyes, and try to think about her day, but only in English. What did I do today? She would ask herself. I woke up early. I listened to a podcast. I went to school. I talked to Mia. The sentences weren't perfect. Sometimes, she forgot words. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that she was training her brain to think in English, just like she had trained it to listen. And every night, as she drifted off to sleep, she felt proud. Because every single day, she was getting better. A small test. And a big surprise. One afternoon, Mia and Scarlett were sitting in the school library when they overheard a group of exchange students speaking English. Scarlett listened closely. A few months ago, she wouldn't have understood much. But now, she followed the conversation easily. Mia nudged her. You understand, don't you? Scarlett smiled. Yeah, I do. Mia raised an eyebrow. Then why don't you say something? Scarlett froze. Speaking still scared her. She had been listening for weeks, but she hadn't actually tried speaking to a real English speaker yet. Mia leaned in. Scarlett, you've been listening every day. You've been training your ears, your mind. You know more than you think. Trust me. Scarlett took a deep breath. Maybe Mia was right. Maybe it was time to take the next step. And so, with her heart pounding, Scarlett turned to the exchange students. Hey, she said nervously. Can I join you? The students smiled and nodded. And in that moment, Scarlett knew. Her journey was just beginning. Scarlett had spent weeks listening to English. She had trained her ears to understand real conversations. Her brain had started thinking in English, and words didn't feel as foreign as they once did. But there was one thing she still hadn't done. She hadn't spoken English to anyone yet. She wanted to. She really did. But every time she thought about speaking, doubt crept in. What if I say something wrong? What if they don't understand me? What if I look silly? The fear of speaking was still there, sitting in the back of her mind, whispering reasons why she should stay quiet. But then came the moment in the library, the moment when Mia pushed her to try. Scarlett had understood every word the exchange students were saying. She knew she could follow along. And Mia's words were ringing in her ears. Scarlett, you know more than you think. So, with her heart pounding, Scarlett took a deep breath and turned to the group. Hey, she said, her voice a little shaky. Can I join you? The students paused for a moment. Then one of them, a girl with curly blonde hair, smiled warmly. Of course. We were just talking about our favorite places in the city. Do you live here? Scarlett hesitated. Her brain quickly translated the question. Do you live here? Yes, she understood that. But how should she answer? She reminded herself. Keep it simple. Don't overthink. Just say what you know. Yes, I live here. I go to this school. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. The girl nodded. Cool. I'm Olivia. This is Jake and Daniel. Scarlett smiled. I'm Scarlett. It was happening. She was speaking English. As the conversation continued, Scarlett found herself in a strange battle. Part of her wanted to run away. It was scary speaking out loud. But another part of her felt something new. Excitement. She had spent so long listening that the words weren't as unfamiliar as before. When Olivia and the others spoke, Scarlett could actually predict what they were going to say. And when she answered, the words came from somewhere deep inside her. Words she had heard over and over in real conversations. Jake, one of the students, asked, "Have you ever traveled outside the city?" Scarlett's brain raced. She understood the question, but she wasn't sure how to answer. She could say yes or no, but she wanted to say more. She thought about the words she had heard in podcasts, in movies, in conversations. Yes, I went to, Chicago last summer. It wasn't a long answer, but it was enough. And when Olivia smiled and asked, "Did you like it?" Scarlett knew exactly what to say next. Yes, I liked it. The buildings were very big. And I ate pizza. The students laughed. Oh yeah, Chicago pizza is the best, Jake said. And just like that, Scarlett was having her first real English conversation. At first, Scarlett translated everything in her head. She heard the question, translated it into her language, thought of an answer, then translated that answer into English. It was exhausting. But then something changed. As the conversation continued, she started hearing words without translating them. Instead of thinking, "What does this mean in my language?" she was starting to understand directly in English. It was a small shift, but it made a big difference. She felt lighter. She felt more confident. And when she got stuck on a word, instead of panicking, she just kept going. When Daniel asked, "What do you like to do for fun?" Scarlett knew there were better words, but she just said what she could. I like, watching TV. And I like listening to music. Nice. What kind of music? Olivia asked. Scarlett thought for a moment. She didn't know how to say the exact genre, so she said, I like songs with slow music and good words. Not perfect. But they understood. And that's when Scarlett realized something important. She didn't have to be perfect to be understood. Even though she was doing well, the fear didn't disappear completely. There were still moments when her brain froze, when she wasn't sure how to say something, when she felt nervous. But the difference was this. She didn't run away from the fear anymore. She kept speaking. She made mistakes. And nobody laughed. Nobody made her feel bad. They just kept talking to her, like she was one of them. And the more she spoke, the easier it got. After about 20 minutes, the group had to leave for their next class. It was nice talking to you, Scarlett, Olivia said. You should join us again sometime, Jake added. Scarlett smiled. Yes. I want to talk more. And she meant it. She had done it. She had spoken in English. It wasn't perfect. She made mistakes. She paused a lot. But she had done it. And as she walked back to her seat, Mia grinned at her. How do you feel? Mia asked. Scarlett took a deep breath. Like, I can do this. And for the first time in her life, she truly believed it. Scarlett sat at her desk, staring at the blank page in her notebook. Her mind wasn't on her schoolwork. It was still back in the library, replaying the conversation she had just had with Olivia, Jake, and Daniel. She had spoken in English. Really spoken. The words weren't perfect, and she had hesitated a few times, but she had understood them, and they had understood her. That was all that mattered. For so long, she had convinced herself that speaking was too hard, that she wasn't ready. But now she knew the truth. She was ready. The fear that had always stopped her hadn't disappeared completely, but it was different now. Before, it had been like a wall, keeping her trapped, keeping her silent. Now, it was just a small voice in the back of her mind. A voice she could ignore. She had spent so much time listening, absorbing English like a sponge, and now she could feel the words coming to her naturally. She didn't have to force them. They were just there, waiting to be spoken. She thought about Mia's face when she had returned to their table. The proud smile, the way she had nudged Scarlett's arm and said, "See? I told you. You just needed to try." Scarlett had laughed. It had felt good. Better than she expected. She had felt lighter, as if she had finally let go of something that had been weighing her down for years. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the next step. She didn't just want to have one conversation and then go back to being quiet. She wanted to keep going, to keep speaking, to make this a habit, just like listening had become a habit. The next morning, she made a promise to herself. She wouldn't wait for the perfect moment to speak. She wouldn't keep telling herself she needed more time, more practice, more confidence. She would start speaking every day, no matter how small the conversation was. The first opportunity came sooner than she expected. At the coffee shop near her school, she usually just pointed at the menu and nodded when the cashier asked, "For here or to go?" But today, she made herself say it. "To go, please." The words were simple, but they felt powerful. She had said them out loud, without overthinking, without fear. She decided to push herself a little more. When the barista handed her the cup, she smiled and said, "Thank you. Have a good day." The woman smiled back. "You too." Scarlett felt something shift inside her. Speaking English wasn't about being perfect. It was about communicating. About connecting with people. And that meant she couldn't keep avoiding conversations just because they made her nervous. She started practicing in small ways throughout her day. When her teacher asked if anyone had questions, she raised her hand, not to ask anything difficult, but just to say, "Can you repeat that?" She answered in full sentences when people spoke to her instead of nodding or using one-word replies. Little by little, the fear got smaller. One afternoon, she and Mia were sitting outside, watching the students walk by. "I think I want to join an English club," Scarlett said suddenly. Mia looked up in surprise. "Really?" Scarlett nodded. "I want to talk more. I think. I need more practice." Mia grinned. "That's a great idea. I think there's a conversation club on Wednesdays." Scarlett felt nervous just thinking about it, but she also felt excited. A few weeks ago, the idea of sitting in a group, speaking English, would have terrified her. But now she wanted to do it. Wednesday came faster than she expected. She walked into the room and saw a small group of students chatting. The club leader, a college student named Alex, welcomed her with a smile. "Hey, you're new here, right?" Scarlett hesitated for a second, then took a deep breath. "Yes. I'm Scarlett. Nice to meet you. We just talk about different topics here, no pressure. Just practice." Scarlett sat down, her hands resting on her lap. She listened as the others spoke, and when it was her turn to introduce herself, she did. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but she did it. And the more she spoke, the easier it got. She laughed at jokes, shared her thoughts, and even asked questions. It wasn't about speaking without mistakes. It was about speaking without fear. By the end of the session, she realized something. She wasn't just learning English anymore. She was living it.